Hello, history class. This is our last class before Christmas vacation, so I won't see you again until January. But I just wanted to cover a few things today as we kind of close out the period of the American Revolution and the writing of the Constitution. And so the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the Bill of Rights. And the first national election occurs in 1789, where President Washington is elected, and the voters elect to Congress a large number of supporters of the Constitution. In fact, almost half of the 91 members of the first Congress had helped to write or to ratify the Constitution. And not surprisingly, considering that the Anti-Federalists were opposed to a strong central government, which is what they were creating now, only 9 of them were sent to Congress. Most of the Anti-Federalists are concentrating their work in the states rather than centrally in the central government, in the federal government. So an immediate issue that the new Congress took up was, how are we going to modify the Constitution? The Constitution needs something added to it. The representatives in Congress are responding to calls for amendments that had emerged as a chief issue during the ratification process, especially in Massachusetts and Virginia and New York, among others. They had all supported the Constitution, but only with the expectation and the expectation that there would be protections written into the Constitution for individual rights, that would be added to the highest law of the land, and that the supporters of the Constitution are now controlling the federal government. What are they going to do? So the legal tradition of having a precise statement of individual rights has deep roots in their English background and in the American states as well. So it's not surprising that this first Congress amends the Constitution by adding what becomes known as the Bill of Rights. Now, somewhere here I made notes about the Bill of Rights, which I don't know. Oh, there they are. Haha, found them. Okay, so what are the Bill of Rights? The Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. You probably learned this before. You know, you're in high school now. You've probably heard this a few times. But the First Amendment covers a number of things. The First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition the government. That's all in the First Amendment. So your First Amendment rights are very important. The Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, especially it specifically says in the Constitution to form a militia. And that's why the Second Amendment is a little more controversial these days. People have differing opinions on, should we have a strong a strong Second Amendment when we don't have militia anymore, that we have a fully formed military and we have state police and local police and National Guard, and do we really need to have the right to bear arms? And many people say, of course we do. Every person should have the right to personal protection. And so there's two very strong sides to that. It's, controversial in a lot of ways, but that's what the Second Amendment says. It guarantees it to us. The Third Amendment is very specific to the colonial times. The Third Amendment protects you from having to house soldiers in your house. You don't have to take care of and feed and, have soldiers like they did when the British were in control of the colonies. Remember, people hated the Quartering Act. They hated having to have the soldiers in their homes against their will and have to feed them and everything. And so that was added into the Constitution, that can never happen to us again, as long as the Constitution stands and the Bill of Rights stands. The Fourth Amendment is protection against unreasonable search and seizure. They cannot come and search your house and take stuff without a judge giving them a warrant, saying they're allowed to do that. Also, protection from having a warrant issued without probable cause. So if the police or an attorney or someone wants to search something or to get a warrant for someone's arrest, they have to go to a judge, and the judge has to hear their cause for wanting that warrant before it's granted, and that's protected under the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. The Fifth Amendment protects you against trial without an indictment. They cannot bring you into a court and try you unless you have been indicted. You've actually had a formal accusation of this crime that's been approved, and then they can bring you into court. It protects you against double jeopardy, which means that if you are found innocent of a crime, you cannot be retried for that same crime. Period. You can stand up in court and say, ha ha ha, you were wrong, I did it, I was guilty, and you got it wrong, but they still can't retry you if you've been found innocent. Okay? They may provide another charge to try you against, but they can't try you again twice. That's called no double jeopardy. They can't put you in jeopardy twice. The next one is that you have the right to confront witnesses. If someone says something against you, that they saw you commit this crime, you can actually confront that witness in court. You can't have an anonymous witness, a witness that, is a secret. You have to be able to look your witness in the face. Against self-incrimination, they cannot force you to testify against yourself. All right, that's why every now and then, maybe in a crime drama, or if you've ever watched like congressional hearings, they may assert their Fifth Amendment rights to not answer a question. That just means basically, I'm not going to answer this question because it might add to your ability to convict me of a crime. All right, so you don't have to testify against yourself, and you have right to legal counsel. You can have an attorney, a lawyer with you. They can't take that away from you. You're allowed to have an advocate, okay? The Seventh Amendment is that you have right to trial by jury. A judge can't just decide what happens to you. If you want a jury trial, you get a jury trial. That's protected in the Constitution. The Eighth Amendment is protection against excessive bail, excessive fines, like more than anyone could pay, and cruel and unusual punishment. There is often debates about cruel and unusual punishment. Is the death penalty cruel and unusual punishment? There are people that very strongly say yes, and people that very strongly say no. So it is a controversial subject, but it's in the Constitution, so those laws have to be decided constitutionally, okay? Right now, the Supreme Court allows for the death penalty. And so the Supreme Court is the one who interprets the Constitution, and that's how they have interpreted it. There are certain states that have said that the death penalty is not constitutional in their state, and so they don't allow that particular state doesn't allow for executions. Okay, so that's just a side thing. And then finally, the 10th says that the powers not granted to the federal government belong to the state governments and to the people. And so that's the Bill of Rights that protect us for all these 230-ish years. So the next thing I want to talk about, thing number 2, is the Compromise of 1790. If you are a Hamilton fan, you may have heard about the Compromise of 1790, but you don't realize that's what it was called. This was a compromise that involved Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. Hamilton won the decision for the national government to take over and pay the state's debts from the war. Okay, Hamilton, right, he's created this financial system. He's created the Treasury Department, and he says for this country to get off on the right financial foot, we need to help out the states. We need to pay off their debts so that they can function without this big war debt hanging over their head. That should be the responsibility of the federal government. And not everyone liked that idea very much. And Jefferson and Madison in particular were not necessarily supporters of that idea, but the three of them gathered together, had a private meeting, just them. We don't know exactly what happened, but what was agreed was that the capital of the country would be placed in the South. It would be placed on the Maryland-Virginia line. It wouldn't be in any one state. It would be a special federal district called the District of Columbia, right? Washington, D.C. And so the Southerners, the Virginians, Jefferson and Madison, got that in this compromise, right? They said, okay, we're not going to fight you on paying the state's debts, but you have to give us the state capital in the South. And the Southerners had been blocking the idea of paying the state debts, and that would not have let Hamilton's program for having a fiscally strong federal government. And the Northerners didn't want there to be the capital there in the South, and so this was the compromise. Okay, but the funny thing is that the meeting was organized by Thomas Jefferson, and he only invited Madison and Alexander Hamilton, James Madison out. The three of them made this decision together. They were the only ones present, and it's led to a lot of assumptions about what they may have discussed during that meeting, and the mystery of what happened at that meeting has become popularized in the musical Hamilton with the song The Room Where It Happened. The Room Where It Happened is actually, I believe, in New York City. I think that's where the room where it happened. But the song, the lyrics of the song are this. So just so you know, it's two Virginians and an immigrant walk into a room, diametrically opposed foes. They emerge with a compromise, having opened doors that were previously closed. Bros. The immigrant emerges with unprecedented financial power, a system he can shape however he wants. The Virginians emerge with the nation's capital, and here's the pièce de résistance. No one else was in the room where it happened. The room where it happened. No one else was in the room where it happened. Okay, so we have one more thing to talk about before we're done today, and we're going to talk about the election of 1786 and political parties. The election of 1796 was the first election in American history where political candidates at the local, state, and national levels began to run for office as members of organized political parties. Political parties that held strongly opposed political principles. And that has existed throughout our history. It's where we are at right now. We have a Republican and a Democratic Party on two different sides. The election results say the Democrats won. The Republicans say no, they didn't win. It wasn't fair, all of these things. And so we have this conflict between political parties. Well, this conflict between political parties goes all the way back to 1786. It's not new, okay? And it shocked some of the older leaders of the Revolutionary era. Even Madison, who was actually one of the earliest to warn about factions and political parties, he was also one of the earliest to see the value of it. But he only saw them that they would be temporary, like you would gather together with a group of people that you agreed with temporarily, and that would be over certain controversies. But then it would dissolve, and it wouldn't be a standing political party. What the older leaders failed to understand was that there were these dynamic new conditions that were created by this new thing, democracy in action. Another way they called it popular sovereignty, meaning the people are in charge. And it was all created coming out of the revolution, and people now understood that we are the fundamental force behind the government. The people are, we the people, right? And the people in our modern American political system, we still express our allegiance to modern competitive political parties. It just seems to be the way people are. I mean, even when you look at a place like England, which their parliament is different than our Congress, but they still pretty much have two political parties, and the Conservative Party and the Labor Party. And this seems to be kind of the way democracy runs itself. I mean, just kind of this is the way it works out. But so 1796 is the first election that has this defining element of political parties. The two parties adopt the names the Federalists, and they are in favor of the Constitution, big supporters of a strong federal government, right? They're the Federalists. And the other is the Democratic Republicans. And even though Washington denounced political parties in his farewell address, and Madison and Hamilton and John Jay had written about the danger of factions, you still have these political parties. And so John Adams, who had been, we know a lot about John Adams, right? But he had been George Washington's vice president, and now he is going to run as the head of the Federalist Party. And he's going, and basically the Federalist Party had the strongest support among those who support Hamilton's economic policies. Bankers, merchants, the owners of small manufacturing industry in urban areas. They were supporters of John Adams, the Federalist candidate. And most of their support comes from the cities and from the Northeast. The opposition party, the Democratic Republicans, they want to take the ideas of the Revolution and they want to extend them to the ordinary people. Sometimes they're just called the Republicans, these Democratic Republicans. They come from lots of different parts of society. They include farmers. They include immigrants like German. And remember back when we did Fort Lewis, we talked about the Scots-Irish, these immigrant ethnic groups, or more ordinary citizens, okay? But interestingly, even though it appeals more to the ordinary citizens, the leaders of the Democratic Republican Party are wealthy Southern elites like Jefferson and Madison, rich men who grow tobacco and other crops on their large plantations. And they were somewhat more diverse because they covered more area of the South. The Federalists were wealthier and had more prestige, largely because Washington himself had been a Federalist before he retired. The Democratic Republicans hate the Federalist policies. One New York paper that was kind of for the Democratic Republicans wrote that the Federalists were, quote, aristocrats endeavoring to lay the foundations of a monarchical government. Okay, they are basically trying to make the government be like a monarchy and the president like a king. And they said that the Republicans were the real supporters of independence and equal rights and a free elective government. So there wasn't a lot of room for compromise in that hostile environment. And the outcome of the election indicated that it was really close between the two sides. New England strongly favored Adams. Of course, he's from New England. Jefferson carried overwhelmingly the southern states. And so the key to the election lay in the mid-Atlantic states where the parties had most fully developed. And it worked out that Adams ended up very narrowly winning the Electoral College by 71 to 68. And because we haven't figured out that yet, that this political parties are going to be how this runs, that our presidential elections are going to be from then until now, be someone from one party and someone from the other party who are opposed to each other. At this point, and this won't change till we pass the 12th Amendment, the vice president is the runner-up. So the guy that the president ran against is now his second in command. And which is very interesting because that means now Adams is the president and Jefferson is his vice president. And they didn't like each other. They didn't get along with each other. They were frustrated with each other. And they basically came to a place where they just strongly disliked each other. And so after they had both retired and gone back, Jefferson to live at Monticello and John Adams to live at Peacefield up in his farm up in Massachusetts, they had didn't want anything to do with each other. But over time, as they grew older and they became more nostalgic for their youth and the days of the Revolution, they began to write letters back and forth to each other. And they, in their old age, they wrote letters and became friends once again. And the very little interesting historical tidbit, which it's hard to believe it happened this way, but on the 4th of July, the nation's birthday, right? Independence Day, on the 4th of July, 1826, both Jefferson and Adams died on the same day. Crazy. Jefferson died in the morning, and his last words are recorded as, "It is the 4th, isn't it?" Or, "Is it the 4th?" Something to that effect. Nobody knows exactly what he said. Some people said he just said, "No more, thank you, doctor," which isn't very inspiring for Jefferson's final words. So most people say that he asked the question, "Is today the 4th?" While John Adams died later that afternoon, and his final words were, "Jefferson survives," because he didn't know that Jefferson had died that morning. So it's kind of a really interesting point of history that these two men that served alongside each other, that helped our nation become the nation that it is, win the Revolutionary War, build a new government, be rivals, be partners in this nation, should end up dying on exactly the same day, and that day was the 4th of July. So that's it for today for history. I want y'all to just have a great Christmas and holidays. I wore my Christmas tree earrings and my Christmas light necklace to be a little festive for you today. I look forward to seeing you again in January, but in the meantime, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Have a great time. Bye for now.